Privilege today to have Larry Feldman speak to us on some social concerns issues. Larry, it's great to have you here, and I'm turning it over to you.
Well, thanks, Jim. It's great to be here. I'm delighted that the Buff Social Justice Committee has organized these, I think it's monthly updates on social justice initiatives in the community. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the study that a group of us are conducting about racial disparities in the Berrien County Jail. This is a study that has been ongoing now for quite a while. It's remarkable how long it can take when you try to get permission to collect data. And we were able to do that with the cooperation of the Berrien County Sheriff's Office. And then we formed a collaboration with students at Andrews University, and that required getting approval from their committee that approves studies. So we've been at this for a while, but we now have analyzed a good bit of the data that we've collected. And we discovered actually very quickly into this study that there's a very significant racial disparity in the Berrien County Jail. African Americans are about 15% of the population of Berrien County, but 45% of the jail population, which immediately raises a whole bunch of questions. Why is that a group would be in the jail at a rate that is triple their population of the county? What factors play into that? And we've been looking at a variety of factors that may contribute to a greater level of crime among that particular population. And we have raised the question of to what degree might implicit or explicit bias on the part of both police officers and members of the community be playing a role in bringing about this very significant racial disparity. And briefly, here's what we've discovered so far. First of all, there's a very significant age issue. The group that is most overrepresented in the jail are young African-American men by a pretty wide margin. And so one question that immediately needs to be addressed is what can be done about this issue? Why is this particular group so overrepresented? And what steps can be taken to ameliorate that issue? Secondly, education is a major factor. Turns out that the white folks in the jail are less likely than the black folks to drop out of high school and more likely to pass GED exams. So that raises the question, why is it that black folks are dropping out of high school at such a higher rate, and what can be done to ameliorate that problem? The third issue is employment, and what we have found so far is that both black and white inmates are mostly unemployed. So across the board, regardless of race, finding greater opportunities for folks in Berrien County to get a job, and related to that, improving the transportation system so that folks can get to a job is an important issue that needs to be addressed. We have recommended a number of steps that can be and should be taken. First and foremost, to improve education in the parts of Berrien County that are predominantly African American, which means primarily Benton Harbor area schools. One major part of that has to do with finances, and a little while ago, a very good thing, in my opinion, happened when the state of Michigan legislature agreed to forgive $10 million in debt that Benton Harbor schools had accumulated over the years, which frees up a lot of money that isn't being spent on interest rates of a loan to pay teachers better salaries and improve a variety of other educational possibilities in the Benton Harbor schools. And we are hopeful that that will happen going forward. And the likelihood is high that that will reduce this racial, or contribute to reducing this racial disparity in the jail. Secondly, it is important that employment opportunities increase. People need to be educated, but people also need jobs. And so greater efforts to bring more job opportunities to the area, greater job training opportunities are an important aspect of what can be done to correct this racial disparity. And third, implicit bias is a complicated issue. It needs to be looked at in terms of possible biases of police officers. If police officers have in their minds, either consciously or unconsciously, that young African-American men are more likely to commit crimes, they are going to be on the lookout for that particular group. There is some evidence from a study of Michigan State Police that Black folks in general are more likely to be pulled over for traffic stops than white folks in Michigan. And that study is looking at some of the same issues that we are. Why is that? What can be done to reduce that racial disparity? So implicit bias on the part of police is an important thing to be aware of and to look at, but also implicit bias on the part of members of the community. If folks, Black folks in Berrien County have in their minds that police are going to be biased, that they are likely to be treated unfairly, that's going to impact how they react if, for example, they're pulled over for a traffic stop or in some other way encounter the police. They are more likely to be fearful of being mistreated. They are more likely to be hostile in their response to the police, and therefore more likely to be arrested for resisting the police. So all of these factors play an important role. We will continue the study. We are hopeful that, one other factor that I should mention is our question of, are Black folks in the jail longer than white folks, or at a higher rate than white folks because they're in the jail longer than white folks? And might that be a function of not being able to pay bail when they are arrested and bail is set? And we are continuing to examine the data to see if in fact that is the case. But in the meantime, one thing that can be done is to help folks who are unable to make bail. And we now have a program that's just getting started. Those of you who attend the Black Summit will undoubtedly hear more about this by the Neighbors Organizing Against Racism organization that's sponsoring the Black Summit, has started a bail fund to help folks who are arrested for misdemeanors to be able to make bail, and that's an important program. So we are going to continue to look at these things in the jail, and we are hopeful that in the spring we can expand this study to look at racial disparities in prosecutors' decisions. There are national data indicating that there are. We want to see if that's true in Berrien County as well. And racial disparities in the sentencing aspects of the criminal justice system. There are data, including a study in Washtenaw County, where the University of Michigan is, indicating, and national data indicating that it is not that uncommon that there are racial disparities in sentencing. So the program will continue. We have been collaborating with Andrews University students. We will continue to do that. Attorney Beth McCree is now teaching at Andrews, and she has a group of interns who are interested in helping out with subsequent aspects of the study, and we're delighted that they will be joining us as we move this study forward. But in the meantime, we don't have to wait for completion of all aspects of the study to recognize that there's an urgent need for programs that build trust between the community and the police, which is the purpose of ALPAC, the group that is sponsoring this study. And anything and everything that can be done to help young people in Benton Harbor, Benton Township, and Niles, particularly, those are the three areas where the racial disparities are the greatest, to finish their education, to get a job, will be enormously helpful. And anything that we in the community can do to help make that happen, we should be doing. Thanks.
Chalice lighting words for this morning. Under the right circumstances, playing with fire is a delight. Imagine being gathered around a fire pit as the crackling flames invite us to sing, dance, and roast a marshmallow or two. Our chalice also invites us to play, although with ideas rather than marshmallows. The flame encourages us to explore who we are, who our neighbors are, and where we are on our spiritual journeys. Today, we light this chalice in the spirit of play and football. Let us trust the light to guide us in this hour and in the days to come, finding joy along the way.
My son-in-law feels like the Chicago Bears are kind of his spiritual, and he's disappointed a lot. My sons and daughter-in-law, one of my sons and daughter-in-law, are very much into concerts. So these are kinds of spiritual things. And by spirituality, I mean they help us to manage our inner lives. So anyway, kids, thank you, Oliver. That was really great. So I have a short story I was going to read earlier, but I'll read it now. So when I began high school in 1964, I quickly learned that the athletes were a privileged caste. I wanted some of that, so I signed up for and played on the varsity football team for 3 years. I really enjoyed the status of being a football player, the camaraderie of my fellow athletes, and the attention of high school girls. There was a big problem, however. I really hated playing football. I was often so nerved up before games that I would throw up. Plus, I just really disliked all the hitting, grunting, and mandatory displays of machismo. I did not go out for football from my senior year. When preseason practice began and I was not there, our somewhat mercurial football coach started sending me messages through my friends on the team that I better get my butt out to practice if I wanted a place in the team. I told my friends and sent a message back to the coach that I wasn't going out and that I would happily never play football again. As I said, the coach was a bit temperamental. During a practice, he suggested to the team that my name be written in as a candidate for homecoming queen. I still feel that loss. No. Remember, this is 1967, so there wasn't as much sensitivity to students' emotional needs as there are today. When the vote was taken for homecoming queen, I did receive a few write-ins. And this is what I learned. It is hard to be a self. Society, your family, and your friends want you to conform to their own images of you. You can't always do that if you want to be a self with a life worth living. Secondly, I learned with the help of my paternal grandmother that while we don't always have control over the events in life, in our lives, we do have control over how we are going to shape our experience of those events. We truly are the authors of our own life experiences, the co-creators of our lives. I now remember getting those votes for homecoming queen very fondly, one of the high points of my high school career. Curiously, the football coach was invited as an honored guest to our 10-year class reunion in 1978. In a terse conversation with him, I learned that he was still feeling grumpy towards me. Anger remained his experience of choice. What a waste. So kids, let's sing you out.
How would you know what love is if you never became a team supporter? How would you know what pain is if a defender never broke your tibia and fibula? If you were never in the wall when the ball hit you right there? How would you know what pleasure is if you never won a title in your rival's stadium? How would you know what affection is if you never caressed it, spinning it with an outside kick to leave it panting against the net? Listen. How would you know what solidarity is if you never stepped up for a teammate who had been hit from behind? How would you know what poetry is if you never made a feint? How would you know what humiliation is if you've never been nutmegged? How would you know what friendship is if you never returned a wall pass? How would you know what panic is if they never caught you off guard with a counter-attack? How would you know what dying a little feels like if you never had to get the ball from inside the goal? You tell me. How would you know what solitude is if you never stood under the crossbar, 12 steps away from someone about to shoot and end your hopes? How would you know what mud is if you never slid at anyone's feet to send the ball for a throw-in? How would you know what selfishness is if you never did an extra move when you had to square it for the unmarked 9? How would you know what art is if you never ever did a Rabona? How would you know what music is if you never sang with thousands in the standings? How would you know what injustice is if you never received a red card from a biased ref? Say, how would you know what insomnia is if you have never been relegated? How would you know what hate is if you never scored an own goal? How? Really? How would you know what it is to cry? To cry if you never lost the World Cup final with a doubtful penalty called in the last minutes? How would you know, dear friend? How would you know what life is if you have never played football?
My name is Catherine, if you don't know me. So in the fall before last, I was sitting all alone alongside the soccer pitch. Why all alone, you say? Well, because that's the life of a soccer mom / coach's wife. Other players had their moms and dads together as grandparents, uncles, cousins, but I'm out there solo, which is perfect if you're an observer of people like I am. I hear some grandpas start in, criticizing a player. How can she protect the goal if she's doing cartwheels? What? Now she's standing? Is she staring at the ground? What is she doing, looking for worms? Yeah, she was looking for worms. I look over at Blake, lost and not at all interested in playing soccer. Hair so blonde it was almost white, with bright blue stars in her eyes. A dreamer, just like me. I never was the sporty type, though not from a lack of trying on my mom's part. I had played soccer at 5, just like Blake, doing cartwheels and blowing dandelions all over the field. After that season, I never thought about soccer, nor sports in general. As a goth teenager, partaking in sport was just too mainstream to be cool. And then in art school, sports were definitely frowned upon. Some artist friends of mine even started a podcast called Bad at Sports. I didn't know any artist friends who played sports or, well, even exercised. I think we all stayed slim by smoking cigarettes and doing drugs and opting to spend what little money we had on art supplies. So all this to say that I never dreamed, never thought sports of any kind would play any role in my life ever at all. Life lesson number 1, life can be surprising. Then I met Nico. When we were dating, he never mentioned soccer to me, and I assumed, as a fellow artist, that sports were not his thing either. Life lesson number 2, assumptions about others will get you into trouble and could seriously affect your marriage. So our worldviews all aligned. We got married and he moved to the US. I started getting hints that soccer would become a thing when he became suddenly, very out of the blue, really into the Colombian national team. At first, he was watching a game here and there, but soon he was at the bar with friends for hours and would come home drunk wearing a bright yellow jersey, singing ballads in Spanish at the top of his lungs. And I was like, What is this? Who is this? Where did he get that jersey? He started trying to explain the game to me, but I tended to zone out whenever soccer talk started, thinking, oh, well, this is just a weird phase. But no, it was not a phase at all. Pretty soon he was talking about some World Cup thing, and that he had to watch all these qualifier games, and him and his friends were always talking about Falcao and some James guy. And eventually I got roped into watching the games too. As it turned out, the Colombian team qualified for the World Cup, which was to take place right about the same time as we were expecting our baby. To which he kept suggesting we call him James Ramel or something like that. And I was like, who? No. Life lesson number 3. Naming your child after an athlete is stupid, in my opinion. Oliver was born shortly after the World Cup started, and well, having an infant is kind of boring because they just sleep a lot, and I was healing from a cesarean, so, well, we just ended up watching all the soccer games with little Oliver cuddled up in our arms. And that's when my life as a soccer mom/wife really started. Life lesson number 4, watching soccer isn't so bad with a bundle of pure love cuddled up in your arms. So fast forward to Oliver, age 8. I'm out there alongside his soccer pitch, watching and listening when I hear these grandpas start to criticize their own grandkid, playing their little heart out on the field. Well, if only he would. Oh, he should know better, blah, blah, blah. These grandparents were downright cruel, criticizing their own grandchild over a soccer game for 5 to 8-year-olds. Sometimes they even yelled at the kid, "What are you doing? Just kick the ball." Wah! Some of these kids were in kindergarten, and, well, they can't even tie their own shoes, let alone kick in a coordinated way. For God's sakes, they're learning how to play the game. So life lesson number 5, see others with empathy, try to understand where they might be at in life, except for cruel grandpas. Okay, no, wait. Cruel grandpas are just victims of a paternalistic culture where boys have to excel at sports and can't show any weakness. So, okay. But my heart really hurt when they turned their critical hatred onto the coach, my husband. Where's he from again? It's no wonder they're losing. Those kids can't even understand him. How come he's always so calm? Why is he always saying they're doing great when obviously they're not? Blah, blah, blah. At this, my stomach really turned queasy and fire alighted in my veins. How dare they be racist? How dare they be racist about my loving, caring, respectful husband who's simply trying to help build up healthy kids? But then I took a deep breath and let it out. Life lesson number 6, mindfulness works. Calming myself, I started to feel sad for these men, sad for our world. How sad they can't just enjoy themselves and cheer on their kids. What a missed opportunity to show those kids that you care with an upbeat and kind support. I felt sad that because of their prejudice, they will never know what amazing human Nico really is. I wish I could say that there was only one time I heard such gross sideline talk, but no, it's a semi-regular experience. But you know what? It's always a good reminder to me of the kind of person that I want to be, that I try to be. Understanding, empathetic, encouraging, loving, and kind. Life lesson number 7, try to understand your disgusts and annoyances because, well, they might just be trying to teach you something. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I am reading something written by Holly Garces, titled Sports and Emotions. And all I'll say about this when I first read it was that I 100% agree with everything she said, and I'm glad for the opportunity to read her words. It's very tiny, though. I probably should have printed it out. Let's try this. That's better. I have to start by stressing that I am not a soccer fan, nor do I play any sports. My perspective on this topic is that a mom of a super sporty kid, a member of a family that loves watching all kinds of sports, and a therapist that is endlessly curious and fascinated by the things people do and why they do them. Sports and soccer, in particular, are very interesting to me for many reasons. It's well studied and proven that playing sports provides a wide range of benefits to one's mental and emotional health. I see the benefits in my son, Ishmael, as he continues to build this love for playing soccer. It is so rewarding to see him grow as a teammate, learning to navigate relationships, disappointment, being a gracious winner and loser, and playing his little heart out. It's beautiful. Playing soccer is good for your physical, mental, and emotional health. Yes, definitely. But what about being a fan? What about the millions of people all over the world that gather in massive stadiums, homes, restaurants, and bars? At one point in college, I explored the possibility of conducting my graduate thesis on the topic of sports events as a socially acceptable space for emotional expression, but I couldn't figure out how to connect it back to art therapy. I kind of wish that Holly would have done that because I would have been fascinated to read it. It's easy to let your mind wander in college, but ever since that initial idea, I've continued to enjoy attending large sporting events, not because I care about what's happening on the field, but rather observing and soaking in all that is happening with the crowd and fans. Although it wasn't a soccer game, I recently went to my first Lions game, and that exposure to the NFL really opened my eyes to the massive power connected to sporting events. The roar of the crowd was overwhelming, and I felt it vibrating in my chest. I've been to hundreds of concerts, and none came even close to the energy of the Lions crowd. Tens of thousands of people all together yelling as loud as they can together. I can only imagine the crowd of a World Cup game. And I have to say, too, as the wife of a intense Lions fan there, my husband Brandon, that energy comes close just in our own living room. So it's fun to watch, and it's definitely very catching. What is it about sports that causes us to gather in this way? So, of course, my next step is to ask Google, what is the psychology behind sports fandom? Is being a fan good for your mental and emotional health? And after reading a couple articles, one on Psychology Today and one on WebMD, the short answer is yes. Why? First, it supports brain health. A super fan will know all the rules, follow a team, their records, strengths, weaknesses, and stats. My stepdad is an amazing example of this, and his brain holds so many stats on so many sports, all the way back to the beginning of time. Next, self-esteem increased. Fans identify with and derive self-esteem from their team's success. Eustress. There can be a release of adrenaline and dopamine while watching your team, which can make you feel positive stress. Escapism provides an opportunity to have a break from daily stresses. Strengthening family relationships. I can also attest to that as my husband brings our boys into the Lions games. It's always fun to watch them cheer along with their dad. Entertainment, of course. Enhancing mood and general well-being and life satisfaction. Watching sports is associated to the release of neurochemicals responsible for mood, pain tolerance, and immune system function. Group affiliation. Increased feelings of social connectedness. You become part of a group, a sense of belonging. A win is a group victory, a loss is a shared defeat. However, one must take into consideration, like most things in life, sports fandom can become too much for some folks. We can't ignore that watching the big game is often accompanied with other vices, like alcohol, junk food, or gambling. Fandom can also be used as a poor excuse to allow one's emotions and actions to get out of control.
Before we start, I just wanted to say two quick things. One, thank you, Wolff, for allowing me this opportunity. And second, this is an invitation because all of you have something to share, a story to tell. And if they allowed me to tell this story, I'm sure they'll allow you to tell yours. So, for those who don't know me, I was born in 1987 and grew up in Colombia's capital city, Bogota. My personal experience with football is directly linked to the place I come from. My earliest football memory is from the 1990 World Cup. During visits to my grandmother, I go to the corner store for a treat, like ice cream or a cookie. The Italy 1990 World Cup mascot caught my attention. It was Colombia's first participation since 1962, and images about it were everywhere. My parents and close family didn't follow it that closely, so I only learned about soccer and Colombia's involvement years later. The 1990 World Cup marked the start of a golden era for Colombian soccer. In a crucial match against Germany, Colombia needed a draw to advance to the second round, a feat they had never achieved before. For 87 minutes, Colombia held off Germany, but at the 88th minute, Germany scored. With just 2 minutes left, all hope seemed lost. But see, that is the beauty of football. In the last seconds of extra time, Colombia scored the equalizers. I still get chills when I listen to the original narration. In 1993, I vividly recall the first live game on TV, Colombia against Argentina at the iconic Monumental Stadium in Buenos Aires. Both teams fought for a direct spot in the 1994 World Cup. Diego Maradona said before the game that the status quo should persist, Argentina on top and Colombia below. He wasn't totally wrong. Argentina had been world champions in '86 and finalists in '90. My dad didn't plan to watch the game. He assumed Colombia was going to lose. But when the Colombian national team plays, the city transforms. The traffic and noise gets replaced with silence until a goal happens. Imagine millions of people in a city watching the same game, all shouting at once. You can hear that everywhere. After the second roar, my dad turned on the TV. He was shocked to see us leading 2-0 against Argentina. As a kid, I occasionally joined to watch, but lacked patience and understanding. By the fourth goal, TV announcers encouraged people to open the aguardiente bottles, and with the fifth goal, they asked the government to declare a holiday. People needed to celebrate. The next day at school, every kid could only talk about the game. I tried to join in, but I knew less. I hadn't seen the full game, didn't know all the players' names or the match context. Something else I didn't know is that the night of the game saw 85 people die and 900 injured in out-of-control celebrations. At 6 years old, I couldn't grasp the reality I was living. I mean, I saw my parents watching the news and hearing about car bombs in the city, but I had no way of knowing this wasn't normal. For me, it was the usual. I likely gave it as much thought as elementary school kids today think about active shooter drills. In the early 1990s, Colombia faced a complex and challenging social reality. The country faced political instability, economic struggle, and the pervasive influence of drug cartels. The time was marked by violence and social unrest. With the drug trade fueling criminal activities, the citizens, especially outside of the city, live in the middle of conflict, including guerrilla warfare and paramilitary violence. The intertwining of drug-related issues with social and political spheres affected daily life and permeated everything. Football was no different. We live in one of the most violent countries in the world at the time, and that transformed our culture. When you feel like you could die any day, you have two options. You can live in fear, taking precautions like my parents did. That's my family. Or you can live on the edge, like any moment could be your last. In big part, our country lived like this. If you could die any night, you might as well die partying and enjoying yourself. Life wasn't sacred. Colombia, a favorite in the 1994 World Cup, faced an early elimination after losing their first two games. Adding to the tragedy, Andrés Escobar, a key defender, scored an own goal, sealing their fate. Days later, he was assassinated back in Colombia. The world learned of his death while the World Cup continued. I think this shameful chapter forced us to question all the violence and the value we had assigned to life itself. Every 4 years, Colombian presidential elections coincide with the World Cup. In 1998, a new president aimed for peace with the guerrilla group, aligning with a new chance for the Colombian football team to shine. Sadly, both the team and the country failed to make progress. As a kid, conflict and massacres on TV news felt normal, much like seeing my country in the World Cup. However, in the 90s marked the only time Colombia qualified for 3 consecutive World Cups. But as I turned 12 and 13, I was becoming aware that things changed. Growing up, every single boy played football at a school recess. But I was never good at it. Despite thinking I'd enjoyed it, playing football caused me stress, especially during competitive school tournaments. I stopped playing as soon as me and my closest group of friends started to get bullied. I told my parents we were getting bullied because we didn't play football during recess. I actually thought we were getting bullied because one of our friends was gay. In the eyes of the bullies, probably both things went together. At the end of that year, my friend left the school and the country. Then the bullying stopped. I believe patriarchy hurts girls and women the most, but it really affects us all. For a while in my life, I didn't care about football, but my distaste with it had to do more with patriarchy than the game itself. I didn't watch a single game of the 2002 World Cup due to the early morning timings and waning interest without Colombia's participation. Yeah, keep going. It wasn't until 2006 during a summer work exchange in southern Indiana that I felt the desire to reconnect with football. At 19, it was my first time spending an extended period in the US and being on my own. Colombia and the US are different in many ways, but one of the things that hit me the most was the little importance given to the World Cup. I was working and staying at a summer camp, and the only computers I had access to couldn't handle video, not even for game highlights. I was missing it all. When Colombia again failed to qualify for the 2010 World Cup that took place in South Africa, I was devastated. My mom, never shy with her football insights, would often remark that it's better for the team not to participate if it meant facing embarrassment. Regardless of football outcomes, my life would continue to change. Because in that football-deprived summer camp of 2006, I met Katharine, and 4 years later, I moved to the US and married her. The 2010 World Cup happened when I was living in Chicago, without a work permit and very few freelance gigs. I had enough time to watch games. Reconnecting with football became a way to stay close to Colombia. In the following years, I expanded my interest to my local club team in Colombia and various European leagues, following Colombia's players' successes abroad as if they were my own. In 2012, I had my first ever marriage fight with Katharine. I went out with some Colombian friends to watch a game. This was against Uruguay. I didn't have big hopes for the game because we had a new coach, and Uruguay was a very hard team to play against. I said I would be back home early, but I arrived late. Also, I wasn't totally sober. But in my defense, Colombia had won 4-0. And a new era for Colombia had begun. A year later, Colombia sealed its ticket to the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. And Katharine was pregnant with Oliver. And I did suggest, only half joking, that we name him James Radamel, after the two best players on the team. On June 13, 2014, Oliver was born, and the next day Colombia played against Greece in their first World Cup game in 16 years. I was able to watch and scream each one of the 3 Colombian goals from the maternity ward. Despite Oliver being a colicky baby, that month marked one of the happiest moments of my life. Holding him in my arms brought me peace. Colombia had its best World Cup, reaching the quarterfinals, and James Rodriguez not only won the Golden Boot, he also scored the best goal of the year. On top of it, Colombia re-elected a president who finally achieved the peace deal. And while 2014 would be a great ending to the story in many ways, it was just the beginning. When the World Cup again came in 2018 and Colombia made it to the second round, Oliver was turning 4. I signed him up to the local youth soccer league, and I volunteered to be a coach. I taught kids to use their feet, and they gave me a new appreciation for football. I've experienced difficult moments helping kids to cope with frustration. I've had my heart broken many times. Once I heard a kid whisper, "I hate this game," after the other team scored their 7 or 8 goal against us. But I've also had the most rewarding moments. Jeff's first goal, Carly's assist to Jameson, Amaya saying, "Thank you, coach." And every time Oliver scores a goal, it feels better than Colombia scoring in the World Cup. At some point in 2020, football resumed in empty stadiums, and while fans chanting is an integral part of football, the silence delivered an intimate experience. You could hear for the first time the players' dialogue on the field, the hits on the ball. Every sound turned the game into an ASMR experience. In a dark time, football served as a source of light. Now I remember more how games makes me feel than the final score. Colombia missed the 2022 World Cup, but without a personal stake, every game brought joy, and I saw about 40 of the 64 matches. I wish I had time to share how meaningful it was for me to see Argentina win the World Cup, tell you about the song Muchachos, and why people in India and Bangladesh rallied behind Argentina. I wish I had time to talk about Maradona's Hand of God in 1986 and the Argentinian grandmother. After the years of following, it is beautiful to see the multitude of football stories woven together. There are so many stories that I wouldn't know where to start or where to end. During the 2022 final with Katharine and Oliver, I experienced a profound epiphany. Flashbacks to every World Cup of my life came to my head. Like a mnemonic device, football enabled me to travel through time, recalling who I was, where I was, and the events of my life at different moments. In that instant, I realized I was creating a core memory, a moment I could always revisit, seeing Katharine engrossed in a soccer game, and Oliver at 8-year-olds standing on the couch in our living room in our house in Bridgman. There are some phrases that become popular. phrases that seem happy, light, and memorable, like love is love, let it be the change. Phrases that encapsulate powerful messages if you take the time to sit with them and really understand their full meaning. I trust that today I've given you a deeper appreciation and understanding of the profound sentiment encapsulated in the phrase, football is life. It doesn't mean that everything in life is about football, or that football is the most important thing. It just means that football is life. Football is life.
Our closing words, hope Nico, you'll forgive me for changing sports. I have a poem, The Church of Michael Jordan. The hoop is not metal, but a pair of outstretched arms, God's arms joined at the fingers, and God is saying, throw it to me. It's not a ball anymore, it's an orange prayer I'm offering with all four chambers. And the other players, the Pollock of limbs, flashing hands and teeth, are just temptations, obstacles between me and the Lord's light. Once during an interview I slipped. I didn't pray well tonight. And the reporter looked at me, the same one who'd called me a baller of destiny, and said, you mean play, right? Of course, I nodded. Don't misunderstand. I'm no reverend of the flesh. Priests embarrass me. A real priest wouldn't put on that robe, wouldn't need the public affirmation. A real priest works in disguise, leads by example, preaches with his feet. Yes, Jesus walked on water, but how about a staircase of air? And when the clock is down to its final ticks, I rise up over the palms of a non-believer, the whole world watching, thinking it can't be done. I let the faith roll off my fingertips, the ball drunk with a backspin, a whole stadium of people holding the same breath simultaneously, the net flying up like a curtain, the Lord's truth visible for an instant, converting non-believers by the bushel who will swear for years they've witnessed a miracle.